First things first, I have to put a few disclaimers, else people are going to whine about me having an opinion. So, disclaimer 1, vote for whoever you want to, I can respect your decisions. By no means is this video in any form or shape meant to disrespect the political opinion of anyone. This is meant to voice my concerns and my opinion. Disclaimer 2, I study material science, I have 2 side jobs, I have friends, I have a wife, I have a cat, I have hobbies, I want to play games, I want to do some sport, I want to touch some effing grass. Why am I telling you all of this? Because I can't possibly see and know everything. I have limited attention and time that I can and will spend on political topics. If I'm not covering certain topics the way you personally would like to have, then just add your source and your respective criticism in the comments. It's just unreasonable to demand that everyone knows everything with all of its details. Most likely there are political topics you're not well informed either, so let's have a mature discussion if that's the case, alright? Disclaimer 3. I will use the words Kemalists or conservatives or they, but I'm by no means referring to all Kemalists or conservatives or politicians. Turkish people are quite diverse when it comes to historic, political and religious topics, and as such you can have a fascist sitting next to a Democrat in a Kemalistic meeting, or you can for instance have a Democrat sitting together with a Sharia supporter in an AKP meeting. What I'm referring to is a very vocal minority, a numerous vocal minority. Disclaimer 4. I fully and honestly believe that there are genuine people in all parties, which is why even if shit hits the fan, things still somehow work out fine. Quote unquote fine. This also applies to the voter base, so please spare me of any X are all morons. If you don't want to acknowledge that there are morons, evil, disingenuous people or power-hungry people within the political faction you support, you might as well start sitting in a wheelchair because you clearly lack a backbone. So that being said, I will start the topic with the AKP. Why? Because some smooth brains think that leaving any kind of remotely negative criticism on the opposition is equal to supporting the government. Imagine you want to criticize something about the German opposition, but you're only allowed to do so if you confirm every 2 sentences that you hate Hitler and that making Jews into furniture was a bad thing. Obviously this is totally a healthy and mature way to have a conversation. So in short, the only reason I'm doing this part is to shut up the obnoxious people. I don't really like to talk about the negative aspects of the government as I'm making a video about it, because the internet is already exploding with them. It's like confirming that the sky is sometimes blue. And since this topic is way too large to cover within 20 or so minutes, I will have to limit myself to a few topics that I believe are main issues, which are education, economy, foreign policy, postmodern culture, constitution, reconciliation, and corruption and nepotism, which is more or less connected to all of this. There are also minor topics such as the rights of the LGBT and whatnot, but that's again a topic of its own. I will try to keep the core issues as short as possible in order to get my point across. So let's start with education. If you're following me, it's fairly obvious that I believe that the Turkish education system, in regards to universities, is somewhat going to the right direction. However, that is by no means my entire opinion about this topic. From my previous videos, it's clear that I'm quite happy that there are at least some quality universities in Turkey, which was not the case 20 to 30 years ago. But I believe that there is a fundamental problem with the education system in general, forcing people to learn bullcrap, putting the wrong people at the head of universities, having to solve math Olympic questions in order to enter proper universities, financing a particular type of schools more than others. The list is long. The AKP had 20 years to solve it and they couldn't. It's not like the education system was good previously, but it doesn't change the fact that the education system is fundamentally flawed and that after 20 years of solving, the issue is not solved. The PISA results are fairly obvious, and even though you could argue that there is somewhat of an improvement here and there, it is by no means enough. So as a Turkish citizen that wants to see the education system fixed, can I say that the AKP is going to solve it this time? Moving on to economy. There are different opinions about economy. There are all kinds of experts with all kinds of fields criticizing and praising the economic development of the past 20 years with all kinds of ways. I'm personally not qualified enough to say that X was good and Y was wrong, but I can at least point to some facts. The early fuel for the economy were direct foreign investments, and in the later half of the 2010s, the economy is being transformed slowly but surely to an export-based economy. Is the damage that came as a result of this necessary? Personally, I don't think the degree was necessary, but I'm not an expert. However, the damage is strongly connected to political statements or dubious actions. Just to name a few, Obviously, there's nothing wrong with the government, it's just the Germans acting like Nazis, definitely. And the Dutch that suffered under the Nazis, they're also like that. There's nothing wrong with the government, totally not. And obviously, threatening your allies is totally fine. They deserve it after all, right? Like, these are a few examples, but you get the point of it. There are a lot of other similar cases, with the Turkish government being very difficult. These things are entirely uncalled for. You may say, how is this affecting the economy? By effing up potential trade, by primarily ruining tourism. People are not going to visit a country, at least not in that particular year, when the head of the state has a loose mouth and compares your representatives to Nazis. Second, it's a matter of fact that a lot of nepotism and corruption is going on here. It wouldn't be wrong to say that it's out of control. The most prominent example was Berat Albayrak, who was appointed as the head of the Turkish Central Bank. He's the son-in-law of Erdogan, and even though he has a PhD in banking and finances, he clearly lacked the necessary experience to get Turkey out of the financial crisis. He should not have been appointed chief of the Turkish Central Bank. There are also other examples such as Sedat Peker and his claims in regards to corruption involving a lot of people, including from the AKP, which are most likely true and too big of a topic to be discussed here. Mind you, this is just one example. There are actually recordings of Erdogan talking about the large amount of money and how the traces should disappear on YouTube. I cannot guarantee the validity of these videos, but where there is smoke, there is fire. One view on the corruption index alone is enough to realize that things are not going well here, so regardless of Sedat Peker or Erdogan's recording, things are not going well. Third, there are sectors that are doing extremely well. The renewable energy sector is doing great, the textile industry is one of the largest in the world, there's tourism, there's the defense industry, the indigenous car, even though it's more of a high-income people car. The gaming industry is getting a lot of attention. Bannerlords 2 is a very successful game. It's not like everything is shit. Obviously some stuff is being done right, regardless of the corruption and nepotism. This also becomes evident if you look at GDP. Now some smooth brains say that all of this would have happened regardless of the AKP, to which I have to say, I can't smell my butthole and predict the future, neither can you. This is the same narrative conservatives use in order to discredit Ataturk by claiming that Turkey would have been independent and with larger borders even without Ataturk. Does this type of daydreaming and conspiracies change the fact that Ataturk saved Turkey? No. So neither does the fact change that these things happened and that they should be credited to the government. It is also worth mentioning that Turkey economically peaked under the AKP, and even though the country was in a recession from 2013 up until 2020, nominal GDP is already increasing again. It's very likely that the Turkish economy is going to reach a new peak within the next 5 years. Fourth, of course this does not mean that everything is fancy and fine. Inflation is relatively out of control, the currency is relatively out of control, minimum wage is stagnating for years, and as previously mentioned, corruption and nepotism is eating away the future of young adults that are being denied their potential because of retaliation. Fifth, there are also a lot of stupid taxes for no particular reason, which I personally view as legalized theft. Electronic devices are needlessly expensive to the point that it is often cheaper to get a visa in Germany, fly to Germany, stay in Germany in a hotel for a few days, buy the product and then fly back. It's really stupid. And no, this has nothing to do with lira being weak. The USD prices are often twice the original price. Just as an example, a PS5 is 40 to almost 100% more expensive in USD value in Turkey. Like even if you earn Swiss francs, it's still not worth it to buy electronic devices in Turkey. This also affects other areas of the economy, such as cars, that get an even worse treatment. So as a Turkish citizen that wants to see his people prosper, corruption and nepotism fought, and inflation/currencies to be under control, can I say that the AKP is going to solve it? Moving on to foreign policy. Even though foreign policy is quite subjective in itself, I believe foreign policy is more or less one of the government's strong points with some exceptions. There are 5 big points that are worth to be criticized, and aside from that I would say it's more or less a good progress. I'm not going to repeat myself here, but I will refer to my video where I mentioned Turkish foreign policy a bit. But to put things into a nutshell, we're making great progress in multiple areas. We're getting along with the Balkan, Georgia, Eastern and Northern Africa, we make progress in the Middle East and so on, which is why I would like to focus on the critical areas. First, the government bet on the wrong side in Egypt and Syria, and since the side the government supported didn't win, both nations are quite butthurt about Erdogan in particular. I don't really see a particular reason to overstate this instance, but I wouldn't disregard any criticism in regards to the decisions the government took here. Second, there are minor nations where the government attempted to solve the relationship, but it went nowhere. Like, no offense to Cyprus and Armenia in particular, I honestly believe that we should get along one day, but I don't really see the status quo as an emergency we have to fix anytime soon. However, people are in their full right to be frustrated about the relationship not being fixed with such minor nations. And please don't get offended by the word minor. I'm using it quite loosely here, as in small nations or nations that are not critical to Turkish foreign policy. This also applies to Sweden's NATO application. I'm not sure if I should buy it that PKK members in Sweden are that big of a deal, but I don't see a reason to deny such a possibility. Most likely the government has a point here, however the way it is being delivered is quite, let's say, inadequate. Third, Greece. I wouldn't say that the issues are one-sided. Greek media is full of shit claiming that we're about to invade Greece because we have nothing better to do than to wake up and ask ourselves how we can finish off the Greeks. Obviously, I've eaten 5 Greek babies this morning already because I have it in my genes to eat Greeks. However, the government is not without faults. Instead of de-escalating the situation, the narrative towards Greece is often, how dare they? They will learn their place," ultimately feeding into the retarded side of Greek media. Like, you're doing what they wanted you to do, you realize that, right? Fourth, Erdogan has a loose mouth. He's quick to insult people, he's quick to be enraged, quick to throw a tantrum. Just as one example, as mentioned, he insulted the Dutch of being Nazis because the Dutch government didn't want to have Turkish politics in the Netherlands during their own election period. I wouldn't say Erdogan is entirely groundless, not with his accusations, but with him being enraged. However, accusing the people that suffered under the Nazis of being Nazis themselves is quite embarrassing. Fifth, the antagonizing and backpedaling or hypocrisy of the government. This is my personal issue I have that I criticize the most. For instance, Israel was antagonized for their treatment of the Palestinian Arabs, and Turkey is morally right to do that since Israel lost jack shit in the West Bank. It is an apartheid system through and through, which is why more and more European nations start criticizing Israel for their moronic actions. But here's the thing. Sure, you're in your full right to do that, but you kept trading with Israel. Now, granted, you could say that you also have a responsibility to your own citizen trading with Israel and that you don't have an issue with Jewish people in general, but why you were so eager to criticize and antagonize Israel, you shut up in case of the Uyghurs in China. So why are we not antagonizing and criticizing China as well? The answer is obvious. They are controlling most of the rare earth elements which are essential and necessary for all kinds of electronics. They also provide a lot of trade. So in case of Israel, morality is underlined, and in case of China, morality is undermined for the sake of money. In short, the signal we're giving to Israel is, as long as you have a large enough trade volume with us, you can even start screwing Turks, we don't mind it. In short, even though there are some breakthroughs and even though I have to credit the government in particular in some cases like the alliance with Libya, there is a lot left to be frustrated about. I don't see Europe as my enemies, I don't see Greeks in particular as my enemies, I don't want my government to be hypocritical with foreign policy, and I don't want the head of my people to insult other people just because someone said no. This is not a mature way to deal with these things. This entire circus about making people your enemies and acting like a rooster that has to chase away all the other roosters is entirely uncalled for. I should probably also mention the alliance with Veto in the first decade of the AKP reign here as well, since the heretic Fethullah Gulen sits in the US. Or we could talk about some dubious alliances, for example the silent treatment of the IS in the first years, but that would be outside of the scope of this video. So if I want change, if I want more dialogue between my nation and other nations, then it doesn't matter how good or bad Erdogan is or was or is not, that change is not coming with him. We might still see breakthroughs thanks to the diplomats that are present in the respective countries, but it will not happen because of Erdogan. It will happen despite of Erdogan. Erdogan made the nature of his foreign policy in the last 10 or so years quite obvious. It is one of confrontation and conflict, not one about peace and a dialogue. So can I really expect an improvement in foreign policy by voting for Erdogan? Moving on to postmodern culture. Postmodern culture as a criteria is more of an obscure subject since there isn't really a list of things which you can and cannot include. So my criteria here is things that a large amount of people do. For example, everyone has a smartphone and wants to use a smartphone, which is why smartphones are part of postmodern culture. So, what is there to talk about? Even though you or I may not be interested in all aspects of postmodern culture, I believe each and every government has a responsibility to make postmodern culture available to its citizen. This does not mean that we have to make everything available without limitations, for instance, porn or alcohol, but this does mean that we shouldn't deny culture in itself. So, for example, anime, gaming, electronic devices that are connected to all of these things, internet, consoles, high-end PCs, cars, events, conventions, and whatnot should not be made needlessly hard to be accessed. But if you, for instance, talk with a conservative boomer, you get sheer disrespect for the wishes of the younger generation that are interested to spend their time in different ways compared to their boomer parents and grandparents. Hence, we get a situation where your interests are not respected and the government that makes the access to these things really hard. There's no need to tax the F out of consoles, since Turkey is not producing any consoles to protect. There is no need to tax smartphones so heavily, since Turkey does not have an indigenous phone production. This is just legalized theft that is being done here. Take it from the poor and the middle class and only allow it for the rich. For the rich, these taxes are a minor inconvenience, so you're not hitting the rich with these taxes, but the poor and the dwindling middle class. Loot boxes in gaming are also an issue that are pretty much ignored. Loot boxes and gacha mechanics are pretty much gambling introduced to children and teenagers at a young age. As far as I know, the government is entirely ignoring this aspect of gaming. We could also talk about the internet censorship, how irrelevant sites such as Wikipedia or Imgur or whatnot are being denied access for dubious reasons. Instead of blocking everything for any kind of minor inconvenience, the government should concern itself with teaching the use of new technology in a meaningful way, so people that read on Wikipedia also understand that it can be full of shit. There's also the potential use of this type of new culture to earn money, which the government fails to understand. Even gaming companies started cooperating with animation studios to create their own animes, which is why Cyberpunk Edge Runner is a thing. There's a lot of potential money to be earned here, and with Turkic history being this rich, there's a lot of potential for soft power that is not being harvested. The late Ottoman period, for instance, could become a great drama. Turanism could be used for a fantasy setting. The life of Subotai could be turned into a semi-historical anime. It could also include conservative elements, or the Independence War, or Atatürk's life. Or imagine Keloğlan and Nasreddin Hoca animated in a proper way. No, I do not consider this abomination as anime. This type of anime movies or series would not just gather the interests of the young, but also the old. So in short, there's a lot of money and soft power to be earned from postmodern culture, and a massive amount of disrespect and detachment from reality by the government. Which is why the government has nothing better to do than to question whether Minecraft is too brutal or not. It's not like the government doesn't understand or see the potential of media in general. Turkish series are a gigantic industry airing in dozens of countries. It earned Turkey a lot of soft power, so it's baffling to me that they are so ignorant with new type of media. In conclusion, as a gamer myself who's part of this postmodern culture, can I say that my interests will be respected and promoted and that the government is doing its best to allow my people and myself to have access to postmodern culture? Moving on to the Constitution. Similar to economy, I'm no expert when it comes to the Constitution. This is a field lawyers should make a comprehensive video about. However, there's at least two things I can point out to in order to explain my issue. Now, first things first, there's a lot of X wanted Y, but party Z was against it. I cannot comment on this since I do not understand the juristical formulations. There may or may not be good reason to deny Y because it is formulated in a way expert A to D does not agree with, even though the suggested thing is theoretically good. I also don't have the time or the will to read through dozens of papers and explanations in order to figure out whether law X is good or not. But I at least have common sense. The first issue I have is the lack of progress. Violence against women is an issue in Turkey, and although the government tried many things to solve it, no permanent solution was found. They then signed the Istanbul Agreement, which was supposed to help, and this was celebrated across Europe, just to leave this agreement later on with the justification of not working as intended, basically. So, why was it not clear that it would not work from the beginning? Why is it not edited to fit the needs instead of removing the entire agreement in total? Where are we going with this? One step forward, one step backwards? We could also talk about the enforcing of laws, freedom of speech, Ahaber's massive propaganda machine airing and spreading lies, defamation and complete bullcrap. We could talk about how Erdogan's lawyers are abusing the heck out of the law that prohibits insulting the president. We could talk about the stupid 10% threshold for the parliament that changed to the convoluted 7% thingy. We could talk about the lack of progress in many areas. It's frustrating to see that problems are piling up faster than they are being solved or even attempted to be solved. Before one issue is solved, there are 3 more issues that come on top of the issues at hand. And it's not like these issues cannot be solved, it's sheer unwillingness to solve it. There's for instance no logical reasons to have a convoluted 7% threshold. This also brings me to my second issue, the presidential system. There's no reason to fundamentally disagree with the presidential system, especially when the parliamentary system kept failing again and again and again. Just as an example in order to show how bad it is. According to recent polls, CHP is getting about 30%, E about 10%, and the remainder of the Altılı Masa about 6 to 8%. So by the old system, the opposition cannot form a government. We would have ended up in a government crisis going from election to election until one side has a majority of the parliament. Now before you pull the trigger, I fundamentally believe that the parliament system is more democratic and offers more representation, but if it keeps failing, then there is no point of keeping it. It is apparent that my people are not ready for a parliamentary system, which is why it's entirely valid to support a presidential system in favor of a parliamentary system. That being said, this by no means translates to the presidential system in Turkey being fine. There is for instance a comprehensive analysis by the Venice Commission explaining what exactly is wrong or concerning and what should be addressed. I will write a separate comment about what exactly they criticize, but for now the source is available in my script, just click on it and read it. So why is the government not changing the flaws? Why can the president appoint infinite amount of vice presidents? Why is it so hard to put a parliament threshold to 3 to 5% without any convoluted BS? In short, can I really trust that the government is going to tackle the many problems Turkey has and that they are going to fix the existing issues when they fail to implement a proper threshold, which couldn't be easier to be done? Moving on to reconciliation. There's not much to say in this part other than people need to chill. Be it the government side, the opposition side, the politicians or the voters. Everyone is eager to humiliate the other side, everyone is eager to victimize themselves, everyone is eager to act like they're super smart and everyone is dumb. Everyone is eager to find a conspiracy in everything. Everyone is eager to discredit you because you remotely criticize the law of their lives, namely the political parties they vote for. Just to drop some examples so people understand that I'm not pulling stuff out of my butt. I'm not a fan of the Gezi protests since a lot of vandalizing at the cost of your average show happened, but this does not equal to everyone participating in Gezi being an anarchist or vandalizer or terrorist. Another example, the Sommer mine disaster turns into destiny. The obligatory kicking someone into the face cannot be forgotten here either, because this was totally necessary, right? YouTube is actually filled with Erdogan's insults. Just to drop one example here.
Küfürdür. Ahlak yoksun. Ve çıkıyor MHP'nin başındaki beyefendi. Aile nedir bilmez.
He's being very personal due to various reasons, and no reason is reason enough to publicly insult someone. This becomes very ironic when we consider that his lawyers are even suing minors for insults. But hey, he can go around in front of the camera and keep insulting whoever he wants to. This is totally not hypocritical. So in short, unless you want to tell me that we Turks are all monkeys that can't solve our issues through a dialogue, we do need to talk with each other without getting personal. I should be able to criticize the government or the opposition without people getting a mental breakdown. At the end of the day, you can find Democrats on both sides, you can find nationalists on both sides, you can find people valuing human rights, the independence of the nation and the prosperity of the Turkish people on both sides. It's absolutely unacceptable that politicians act the way the AKP does. But when politicians fail, it is the duty of the people to correct and lecture the politicians, not by humiliating or insulting them, but by changing their voting behavior or by protesting the nonsense they are spreading. Long story short, I want to see a dialogue happening. I want my people to talk to each other. Do I get this with Erdogan? So all in all, I must ask myself, what do I even get in return for my vote for the government? Even though some of my demands are not easy to meet, at least most of them should be addressed. So what do I get? Unfixed problems? Out of control issues? Self-made issues? More polarizing? What is the worth of my vote for the government?